More and more federal agencies are transforming their IT organizations by adopting agile practices and principles. It appears that federal IT leadership has also embraced the agile movement as the answer to delivering to their customers at high velocity, and just as importantly, maintaining and evolving a high-quality product. But make no mistake, this is a journey, and it's not going to be easy. There will be pain. Old approaches and old ways will have to change, in some cases radically. Roles and skill sets are going to have to evolve to meet new demands. And frankly, those who are unwilling to let go of the past are going to become less and less relevant. Successfully making this transition is going to demand clear and consistent messaging and direction from leadership. And it will require the entire organization, not just IT, to understand that there will be failures and missteps along the way. In fact, we're encouraged to embrace those failures and share them to build a learning organization. Of course, the goal here is not simply to transform organizations, but to do so in order to deliver greater value to the end user. And not just value, but relevant value. So we accepted the Agile approach and DevOps principles and practices. But how did we get to this point? Why is it that IT leadership is so willing to make this move? Why incur the risks, the upheaval, the difficulties that any change of this type involves? Well, as Rachel Maddow would say, as in all things we do, history is here to help. Over a series of podcasts, we're going to reach back into ancient history of IT. In doing so, we're going to try to develop some context around how we got to this point in software development, because it's important to understand not just the what, as it is to understand the why. Our discussions will be framed by a series of blog posts written by DuPree titled The DevOps Entry Point, Context, Maturity, then Metrics. Our goal is to shed some light on the why we're driven towards Agile and DevOps and help us connect the dots from earlier in our industry's history up to today. Welcome to the Government CIO Agile Advocate Podcast. I'm your host, Bill Drew, and I'm here with Al DuPree, former Director of Innovation at NIST and Chief Information Officer for the Congressional Budget Office. Welcome, Al.
Thanks, Bill. It's good to be here with you.
So, full disclosure, as always, Al and I have known each other for close to 3 decades. We first started working together at GE.
Yes.
Which was early 90s?
It was, and it was easily the watershed project of my life. There's no two ways about it. Yes.
That was amazing. To give you a perspective of how long ago it was graphical user interfaces were still eye candy.
That's correct. They were in their infancy. To give you even more perspective, it was OS2 and Presentation Manager.
And even more so, Larry Ellison was on 5X, going to 6.
Yes, he was.
And almost went out the door.
Yes, he did. And
Crazy.
There's some of us that wish he had.
Besides the NIST and the Congressional Budget Office, tell us a little bit more about yourself.
Well, we've covered GE Consulting. I've also got, I guess, what you would call an entrepreneurial streak. Either that, or as my wife would tell you, I'm just maybe off my medication. I don't know. But I've started a couple of companies and run them into the ground and emptied the retirement account in the process. Back in the 90s, I started digital sales, which was focused on the retail segment and automation in there. And I also started a small consulting company, which is what led to CBO. So just a lot of public sector, a lot of private sector, like that. Managed to keep the mortgage current.
Always nice. So Director of Innovation at NIST. I love that title. Because there was a lot of people at NIST who loved that title, right?
Yeah, in particular, the people who were most enamored of it were the 4 Nobel physicists who kind of look at you and say, so, your PhD is from where? And in what? It was...
And what groundbreaking science did you bring to them?
Yeah. So it was not exactly the best choice of names. Marketing, it failed miserably. But we did manage to get a few things done. We did introduce some new technologies and challenge the organization to rethink the way it was doing business. So there was some success. But yeah, that marketing side just never quite worked out.
Yeah, there's a lot in the name.
Yeah, buddy.
So let's get into this series of blog posts. What's the overall premise?
Bill, from our history together, you know that software and software development has been an evolutionary process. And after several years, as well as teaching in the CIO Institute, which is run by Carnegie Mellon down here in Arlington, Virginia, I stopped to think very carefully about how we arrived at where we are. In particular, after the experience at NIST and looking at how organizations choose to break up the IT function, it occurred to me that there's some things that are amiss. That took me down the DevOps road, and the DevOps road took me into the history. How did we get here? Why are we here? And that's what started the blog posts.
I got to tell you, when I first read it, I wasn't that crazy about it. But I absolutely love this because there is so much about what people do in our industry, and they don't know why they do it. So I think it's really exciting. You're going to go over this 3-part series, but this first part is really important because we're going to be setting the context, right? Which is few people know.
And context in this case is everything. It decides so many things. And if you stop and stare at it for just a moment, you realize that you wound up going down a path without necessarily consciously thinking or deciding to, that wasn't necessarily in your interest.
In this first blog post, you give a few examples of the initial successful implementations. You talk about Big Iron, about those people, Anderson, IBM, and such. But you know what's amazing? The picture I get in my head is this gigantic monster in a room. This machine, tubes, card readers, and we put together an accounts payable system. Can you imagine? After you got that going, it's like, stand back. Okay, don't touch the buttons.
Back away slowly.
Back away slowly. Mm-hmm. And don't kick the card.
Absolutely.
Please don't do that.
Absolutely.
So talk to me about these huge efforts and the participants and how they help shape our industry at the beginning.
So if you go back to the middle 50s to the early 60s, when General Electric was experimenting with ENIAC and Arthur Andersen was looking to extend its accounting practice, and IBM was introducing the 370 series, what you see is the market forming up to provide for business in the best way that was in the interest of the vendors. IBM sold, as you say, Big Iron. They provided operating system software and ancillary software as essentially an add-on. Early on, for instance, for those who remember CICS, CICS was not a profit center. They made money on their machines. And in the process, as they sold into organizations, they pushed a model of organization within their customers that mimicked what was best for IBM. It's no accident, nor is it a secret, that the early days of computing in the industry were primarily focused on Big Iron, as you say. The idea of programming and such were actually, we won't call them secondary, but we'll call them also ran. That happened in the customer venue. It certainly didn't happen in IBM's venue until much later. On the other hand, Arthur Andersen and the like, Pete Marwick Main and Arthur Little and what was then the Big Eight, which has now become the Big Four.
You mean
the Big Eight accounting firms.
Right.
They were looking for new sources of revenue, new avenues to expand their practices. And it was an obvious expansion when customer or a client with whom you had an audit relationship looked at you and said, is there any possibility that you can help me with this financial system? Not only was it an obvious kind of extension, but we already had within our audit practices methodologies that lent themselves, at least in a very narrow band of applications, to the implementation of that software. So once again, I've got a series of vendors who are deciding how their customers are going to do business that's really in the best interest of the vendor.
And Anderson and IBM cut it up in a nice way.
They did, and they partnered in
We'll call
a
it
very real sense.
partnered.
Yes, they did. When I was first coming out of graduate school to projects within Arthur Andersen, where I worked for several years along with you, it amazed me the partnership that had evolved around DB2, which was just then being introduced, and Arthur Andersen, soon to be Andersen Consulting, where Andersen would make the claim that they were the worldwide experts in DB2 with IBM sitting in the room, which I just found utterly amazing, and there was never any objection. They cut the market up beautifully.
Because he was sitting next to an IBM salesman who said, that's fine, you should see my commission.
And please write me a check. The only people that didn't benefit was maybe Honeywell. I don't know.
Who?
Honeywell.
I did like the way they kept companies around, wasn't it?
Yes, indeed. Indeed.
Because we believe in competition, right? At 97%, there's no reason why you can't have some, right?
Ask Microsoft.
So you write about, though, these early pioneers. This is an interesting statement. They were engineers and auditors, accountants, but above all else, they were salesmen. Elaborate on that for our listeners.
So, at my heart, a capitalist just like anyone and everyone else.
Does your son know this?
No. We're going to keep this podcast away from him. But I also recognize that the market very often comes up with solutions that are far from optimal, and that it is a random walk. So while there were initial efforts to organize information technology within organizations that were shaped by these vendors, those initial efforts were essentially to the benefit of those who were selling. And the selling process, if you look at markets, is extraordinarily powerful. In particular, when you're talking about the introduction of new technologies, and in particular, when you're talking about technologies that are being represented as game changers, as having the capacity to transform. All of those things coalesced in the middle 70s through the 80s to create just a perfect storm for those vendors who were capable of exerting that influence.
You look at the rise of Andersen Consulting's revenue.
Yes.
Oh, over that time?
It's amazing. It is amazing. And it's no accident that the partners who were responsible for that rise looked across at the audit practice and said, you know, it's been great, and we deeply appreciate the use of your name, but we'll be going now.
I would have paid anything to be in that one with those old audit guys or the accounting guys. Absolutely just gangsters in suits who just looked across there and said, you know, I don't think so. I think you're going to be kicking it upstairs and you're going to keep doing it.
And for many people don't recall the history of that breakup. There was an initial movement of partners to Saatchi and Saatchi.
Oh, I was there.
Yes.
I was actually, supposedly, do they call it collusion now?
That's what
Is
they
that
call
right?
it.
And I had no idea what they were talking about.
Yes.
I thought it was just a tasty candy bar or something.
No. But that move demonstrates that, period of the firm's evolution demonstrates just how amazing the market potential was. Even further, the evolution to Accenture demonstrates just how powerful the relationships were between the individuals who were selling and the companies they were selling into, because they never missed a beat. The brand changed, the name changed, but the revenue stream certainly didn't.
Seemed like a crazy thought to leave for $1 billion. Now it's a bargain.
Yeah, how about it? How about it?
I really like this thought. So, quote, "It's absolutely true that we can engineer an aircraft carrier as well as the aircraft that took off from it. It's equally true that we had little experience engineering anything that you couldn't put a wrench on or create a blueprint of."
And stop and think carefully about how we've approached the notion of software development. Beyond the idea that IBM encouraged a specific kind of organization that broke things into pieces that weren't necessarily natural, shall we say, that, separated infrastructure, for instance, from software. Beyond the fact that Anderson kind of instituted these wonderful waterfall methodologies and such.
Oh, and by the way, just to give history, waterfall used to be good.
In a very narrow band of projects or efforts, it's still good.
Oh, I think so. I would prefer that my pacemaker
Yes.
not be agilely
Yes.
developed.
Nor my space shuttle.
Oh, there's
Yes.
a good one.
Right.
Or my Boeing.
Yes. Yes. But the trick here is it's only applicable or useful or appropriate for a very narrow range of extraordinarily high risk kinds of endeavors in which it is fundamentally important to understand requirements and understand them in their totality up front.
There's, I think, the key. Okay? Mm-hmm. Please. I can't stress more. Requirements are a good thing.
A very good thing.
They're a very good thing.
And Agile doesn't dump them.
Well, I think some people believe they do. As crazy as it thinks.
They need to do a little homework on Agile.
They need to stop doing that.
Yes.
So you don't need to get the last one before I start. But there is that call that, hey, you know what? I might have a good idea how to proceed forward. And then I'm going to maybe formulate some of those details around the edge.
And to understand that, unless I'm sending, the space shuttle or a satellite out to where it can't be retrieved, and even in some instances when I do that, the idea that software is, in quotes, finished is laughable.
Oh, we'll get to that one.
Okay, fine.
So, bring back your Anderson. What was the book? The little Bible we all. It's kind of like Miles'
the
little
Method
book.
One?
Method One book, yes.
Methadone, yes. Yes.
So in your little book, there were two things that were always stressed. On time.
And on budget.
Under budget.
Yes.
We never go under budget, but at least very close to it, right?
Yes.
Two drivers. So that's burnt into your Anderson creed.
Yes.
Right? And frankly, I don't know what's wrong with that, especially when you're spending my money. Why? Tell me, why are those bad constraints?
Well, it's interesting. Going back to the wrench proposition, I would contend that even Boeing or Northrop Grumman very rarely deliver things that we put wrenches on time and under budget. Otherwise, we wouldn't have fighter aircraft that wind up costing triple what the estimate was.
There were some slight overruns.
Yeah, there were some slight ones. But the trick here is really very simple. The proposition, as we both know it in the creation of software, is that I don't necessarily know all of the things that it's going to be required to do at the front end of the process. That the process itself provides for a level of redefinition, modification, and re-envisioning that make it very difficult to, at the very front end of the process, say what the back end of the process is going to look like or cost. There's an easy way to think about it. I have financial software that, since the 1500s and the development of double entry accounting, is pretty standard and pretty straightforward in its installation. I have a chart of accounts that has to be developed. There are specific modules that have to be modified or configured. And ultimately, the idea of getting it into place is a relatively predictable and stepwise kind of process, which is why the auditors in the very early years were great people to put in your financial software. But there are very few things in American business that are like that. I would contend that, for instance, if I was Best Buy and I was putting in a system in the late 90s and suddenly got slammed by Amazon, that I needed the ability to turn, to pivot, to change directions as a business, and therefore to change the shape of my technical environment and my technological approach, and the applications that I deploy in response to that competitive thrust. If I'm doing waterfall, I don't have that opportunity. I don't have that agility.
Yeah, it's funny how the world doesn't wait those 18-month delivery cycles. It'd make it a lot easier if they would.
If you could get your competition to freeze in place, then I'll buy waterfall all night long.
It seems reasonable, but they just won't come around to it. But when you really think, this is a hard sell. Because when you're talking money, then people get crazy, right?
Yes.
Okay, I'm a little slip on time. Are we still in budget? Oh, yeah, we're still in budget. Okay, I'm okay with that. But when you start going, treat me like an NSA budget, no, I'm not going to like that. You can't keep coming back to it because then you start to have people wonder, do you really know what you're doing? So isn't it, we'll talk about this later, but you have to change the expectations on that. And if you don't and set that up and you just assume, oh, that wad of cash I gave you, that was it.
Right. So there are methodologies and approaches out there that are being driven largely by the entrepreneurial community, the lean startup and the lean methods, that suggest that instead of trying to envision the complete thing at the very beginning of the process, rather try and envision some minimally viable product whereby you can evaluate whether or not it is worthy of additional investment. Taking an incremental approach allows you to fail quickly, allows you to reduce the overall project risk, and allows you to pivot where necessary. By trying to specify the whole thing up front, you increase your risks. It's ironic. You wind up doing precisely the opposite from what you want. You want predictable time and resource allocation, but by stepping back so far in the process, you wind up with far more risk in the outlying time periods and far more volatility in the cash flows. It's as simple as that. And it's the difference between, again, an engineered product or an architected product. And we use those words often when we talk about software, but we're only using them because our early mentors, the people who helped us to shape this discipline, they used them because the only thing they had to think in terms of was an engineering process. Putting together software is not like erecting a building, even though we still talk in terms of architecture. It is possible to stand back and stare at a building and predict with some level of precision how long it's going to take to get the skeleton up, how long it's going to take to get various other components in place. It's not true of that which we cannot touch. It's certainly not true of software.
I wonder if we could come up with a better word than fail. Like maybe evolve or transition or pivot. Because anytime you say fail, then the bean counters are like, they're pulling back. They're not pumping the brakes, they're stomping them, right? They need to have a review. We need to have an audit. I didn't think you were going to make it.
While I understand your desire, I'll also point out the following. One of the things that I came away from NIST with is the notion that in order for science to proceed, in order for it to accomplish, in order for it to evolve, you must fail.
We're on the same page here. In fact, learning is a destructive process, right?
Yes.
It is.
Yes.
It's not to an accountant. They don't think that's, I'd rather not learn. I thought I gave you the things that you should have gotten done. So that's where maybe we could change the wording for that.
Well, but one of the, wording is one possible change, and I'm not disputing it. But one of the other things that occurred to me as I've been constructing these blog posts as well as looking at some other potential projects around it is simply this. Over the last 50 years, we've been conducting essentially a research and development project, ongoing, with information technology at its center. I think I'd rather move my IT efforts in the direction of the accountants thinking of me as R&D And inside of an R&D context, I'm allowed to fail. I'm expected to fail.
Expectations again.
Yes.
Right.
So I'd rather move my efforts in that direction than try and put language around it that makes it more comfortable for the bean counters. And I'm all for bean counting because, again, I think the market is a wonderful engine for innovation and solutions and progress. But I also understand that it has limits like anything else, and that those who are in the financial end of it need to be appropriately managed as anyone else.
Yeah, but they have the money.
There's that. Don't you hate when that happens?
And that's where we came from.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
So it's kind of hard to get out of that. But even what we shouldn't do is go into engineering.
No, absolutely
not. We should
not.
be, and this is hard though too, because then you don't get budget, right? Because they're like, you guys just waste money.
Yes.
So.
But now, just so we're clear, the one thing that encourages me, that gives me some level of optimism, is back when we first started, really, the gray hair is real. Back when we first started, it could be considered in large part a cost. You know, if you think of systems kind of as top line, bottom line, and velocity, okay? You know, the top line systems, they grow revenue. The bottom line systems, they constrain costs. And the velocity systems get information from one side of the enterprise to the other side faster. So email would be velocity, ERP would be a bottom line system, and then top line. Well, back when we started, there weren't a lot of them because we didn't have the web. We didn't have the ability to grow revenue from within IT. But we do now. So we've got a different level of clout. And I think it's time to start exercising that clout a little differently. If I can help you to grow your top line, to sell more things, then I think you need to look at me very differently than as a simple cost center or someone who costs you money. No, I can bring money to the table now.
Yeah, good Lord, but they're going to be calling us BD.
And
there's nothing wrong with that.
Right.
Okay.
I mean, we do live in a marketplace.
We
so
do, yes.
I'd be fine with that.
Especially if it gets me budget.
And a commission, who knows, right? Come on.
But to use it strategically instead of a cost avoidance model.
Yes.
Give me 10% and then do the same thing. That's not a way to be strategic.
So, and again, there are pitfalls along that road, and I'm here to acknowledge that, you know, getting from the stance that many of us regard us now to that future stance has lots of different potholes along the way. But the end game is really straightforward and simple. You need to look at me as first a level of experimentation with a technology that is not necessarily predictable. Second, as responsible for delivering a minimally acceptable thing to test the hypothesis as to whether this is effective or not. And third, an organization that is responsible for identifying and absorbing those technologies that will make a difference in our operation in the future. I think those three things, regardless of whether we end up in engineering or sales or operations or wherever, because, you know, I mean, when you stop and think about it, a financial services organization like Capital One, that now regards itself as a software company, by the way, but they're going to locate that capacity in a different place than a manufacturing concern like Black & Decker. Where you put me and what you call me doesn't matter nearly as much as how you treat me.
Absolutely. So how we do these things shaped by who did them originally, right? So it seems like, as you said, we're applying those old school manufacturing approaches.
Yes, we're
building, and somebody says, you know what? This waterfall looks like a assembly line.
It does.
Who uses, or used to use assembly lines? GE, IBM.
Black
and
&
it
Decker.
makes sense. And it makes sense too,
Yes.
right? I put it over here. It ends right here. And the thing I got was what I told you to give me. And it's a long, predictable spots. We go from domain to domain. You put on this, I screw this, and then we have a washing machine.
And you end up with companies like Boeing or Black & Decker developing extraordinary expertise in a particular area or niche of that process. So for instance, with Black & Decker, they are known for their capacity to build small motors, small electric motors. So, the notion of assembly lines and the process that has defined manufacturing over the past 100 years has produced some extraordinary core competencies in, some of those companies. It works for stuff.
But I always think about this is, you're building one side of the bridge, I'll get the other one, okay? When you're building a bridge, you kind of have to line those things up. The consequences are somewhat they're dire. Software's amazing. It's like, hey, move those pillars over a little there, Al, and we line up. The interface works. We're good to go. All you did was rebuild it. That's almost a concept that's hard for people who don't do it, who haven't done it, to really grasp as the concept, but also the opportunity it gives you.
Yes. But now, just so we're all clear, the assumption in what you just said was that we built it in such fashion that those pillars move. So often in the past with our waterfalls, we'd build the pillars, and the minute we tried to move them, everything broke. So again, you're pointing to the fact that I cannot take the engineering paradigm and lay it over software successfully. I have to do things differently. There may be elements of it that are useful to me, and they may be useful at kind of specific points in the process. But trying to simply take the entire of that engineering, manufacturing, assembly line notion and pushing it over and saying we're going to make software like this is a recipe for
disappointment.
Yes, and over budget and yeah.
Somebody's going to win, but it's not going to be you.
No. And it also sets up some very interesting
definitions of success.
Yes, and conflicts within the organization.
Yes, very much so.
Yes.
I like this one. You write these things down. I pull them right out of it. The very first of which is a simple declaration. Software is only done when it's retired and taken out of service. You talk about a tough sell. This guy has been fixing this road for the last 10 years. But we can't envision it as a road.
No.
We should envision it as something that when we started and you started using it, it has evolved to something that doesn't look very much like what we started with.
Right.
And the reason we did that is because these pesky competitors or policies changed, or technologies gave us some opportunities to change that. But what I see on the expense and the cost is like, this guy won't stop.
Well, it's interesting. I understand exactly what you're saying, and I can see the CFO coming at me saying the same thing, and I understand. And I guess what I'd do is kind of sit at the table and fold my hands, in front of me, and look at him or her and say, well, what have I been doing? So why don't we just acknowledge the way it works instead of pretending that it works some other way? Ultimately, software has always evolved. I have always been required to maintain it. I have always been required to change it. Let's take that on up front instead of deciding somewhere down the road that it's going to happen. Let's make it part of the maturation process.
Has it really evolved? I mean, have we always evolved? You think about some systems, and they're like, they're not as hardcore as the card reader. I put it in there, stand back from that. The reason I did accounts payable because I don't like to pay my bills anyway. But we don't do that to the accounts receivable. But that didn't change much. That was like, we got to fix that. And that evolution of agility hasn't been grasped or, I think, understood or even enabled in our systems.
Agreed. And again, if you kind of watch how business has evolved the use, you'll see that, kind of at the very beginning, looking at those things that the auditors would look at, there's not a tremendous amount of volatility in your financial package. I mean, McCormick and Dodge, God give me strength.
Yeah, you don't want your volatility in those.
No.
Yes, those accepted
Right.
packages.
But I'll go back to an experience at Black & Decker where I worked in the late 90s. We put together engineering workstation software called CADM and CATIA that allowed us to reduce product development time from the 5 years that it took to put a compound miter saw on the market to 18 months. The opportunity that provided was well and truly amazing. But the idea that you're going to put that on an engineering workstation and it's going to stay static like your financial software is absolutely insane. It's not. It's going to change. There are things that are going to evolve. The ability to 3D model, the ability to evaluate whether a particular device breaks when it falls. All of those things are being built out, and they're going to change, while your financial software is still doing accounts payable the way it did 50 years ago.
So let's talk about change. Velocity. Oh, it's a great thing. That says the developer. Says the product manager. Says the product owner. What does ops say to this?
So, again, looking back for context, operations and software development have been divided unnecessarily and inappropriately for the last 50 years. In fact, we've gone even further to divide infrastructure into various components. So now I don't just have servers, I have servers and networking and God help me, we're about to develop cloud. Okay, great. The proposition I have for you is that by taking each of those individual components and bringing them back to the table and helping them to understand that we have a shared responsibility to deliver product, that operations and their incentive package, their incentive bundle, can be arranged in a way that is consistent with production of software and its support in the organization. So, the help desk and the ops folks and the software people, oh dear God, they're all at the table and they're all rowing in the same direction. What a concept.
And it's kind of like the no ops coming down the road.
Yes.
Which is, you think DevOps was
Tough.
Inflammatory.
Yes.
Wow. Wait till you say no ops, as in like, I don't need you people.
Yeah, pretty much.
Not exactly what it's saying.
No.
But it's actually getting to what you're saying, right? It doesn't matter that this is your expertise. You're going to be involved in development. You may take front and center as we go down, or at least we're in production. And operation guys may have more experience and expertise in a certain area, but still they're part of the team up front and be able to give input into that.
Right. And take it a step further. There will be times when those people who put their hands on tangible things, on hardware, actually maintain a lead. I'd point to the experience I had recently at NIST, in which we started to experiment with Cisco's CMX capacity. It's essentially its proximity location or locating ability, to start evaluating how we might do things with computing objects in 3 space, tracking things like hazardous material, doing things like supporting conference kinds of efforts by allowing people to come into and out of rooms and to know that they're there. And that was instigated principally and primarily by the infrastructure folks, and the software people turned around and looked and said, wow, we can do something with that.
I do respect you guys.
Yes, indeed. How about that? I'm glad you're at the table. Let's talk some more. What are you doing for lunch? So, it's not always the notion that software leads. It's the notion that, we're all at the table and we're rowing in the same direction.
We're going to go over more as we go this series, which is going to be great. So I don't want to go too far in it. So how about if we do this? Let's step back and review what we've talked about and talk about, what we've established so far as practices in the past in relation to Agile and DevOps adoption? And you've done some of that already, right?
So context is everything. And the context here is we have introduced a new capacity into the enterprise that has largely been shaped and defined by vendors and those vendors' needs and desires. We have an infrastructure capacity because IBM finds it useful to sell into a specific organization. We have a software capacity because Larry Ellison finds it useful to sell into a specific organization, or a database component. Each of the things that we've grown have grown at the behest of the marketplace looking to sell us things. And we have tried to keep up by responding to it by growing yet another arm. DevOps is a simple proposition. And that proposition is we need to get all of the arms on this octopus back to the table and under control of one, for lack of a better brain, that each of the tentacles needs to be coordinated and needs to understand that we all own the final product, regardless of where it was instigated from. And that ultimately, if we all come to the table and row in the same direction, that we'll put together a far better product. Now, in addition, we're also going to lower the expectations of management to understand that this is not an engineered product. This is a research and development effort. And that research and development effort is going to put together opportunities that the business can evaluate and decide whether it continues to invest in. But we're not going to go big bang anymore. Does that about wrap it up?
I think it does.
Okay.
But what it comes down to is it's that very first thing in the CALMS or CAMS framework, right?
Yes.
It's culture.
Yes, it is.
And culture, that word, is totally misunderstood, just brushed aside.
Yes, it is.
As in like, okay, that's great. So it's not going to the opera. It's not appreciating good music. It's about what you just said. And that is an extremely painful move.
It is. But Peter Drucker said it best. He said, culture eats strategy for breakfast.
Yeah. But what you're doing, though, is you're changing the alignment and structure of companies. It's the Conway's principle, right? If you have a siloed, compartmentalized organization, and then you build siloed, compartmental software and systems, don't look at me with a surprised look.
Right.
Okay?
Right.
But doing that is really difficult. I see contracts in government acquisition that says, we want DevOps. Okay. But you contracted in a waterfall, compartmentalized way. And I don't think it's as if they want to be contrary to it, but they don't understand that it's not tools first. It's not your vendor, because your vendor, no kidding, I've had vendors, I really would like to see this product because on the box, it says DevOps in a box. And I almost feel like if I open it up, it'd be like one of those Jack in a Box and pops out. Or at least it's got dust in it. I just go and throw it on things. Like, there you go. Yeah. Start working together.
Should be illegal.
So the vendors are pushing a panacea.
Yes, as they always have.
Yeah, and I was one of those. And it's easy to bite on it because not only tools, something I can put my hand on, they don't push back, they don't get upset, they don't have a career at my company. They're threatened by the changes in the skill sets that are going to be required.
True. All true.
Yes. Some will not make it in this journey.
That's interesting because, I look back over the 30 plus years that I've been in technology now, and I have only seen one very large shed. And that would have been Big Iron back as we moved into far more distributed sets of circumstances with PCs kind of taking over. And it's true that there were some COBOL programmers that, lost their footing. It's also true that they got their revenge at Y2K. But having said that, I want to say I think the idea that, people will be, in quotes, left behind by these changes, however massive in technology, is really overblown. That technology for technologists changes really quickly. But for the market as a whole, when I went to Black & Decker in the 90s, they still had System 36 from the early 60s. Okay. It doesn't change nearly as fast as we all think. When I started digital sales in the middle 90s, I knew that handheld computers were going to be appearing on the retail floor and people were going to beat me to it. Well, now 25 years later, we're finally seeing that come to fruition. So I don't think it's as scary out there as people want to make it out to be. And I, in fact, encourage lots of people to not look at the adoption of DevOps and the move to Agile as a threat to their current standing. I encourage them to look at it as an opportunity, if they choose to take it, to move to something new.
I would say move up the food chain.
And ultimately, whatever they're sustaining right now is likely to sustain them to retirement if they choose.
Yes, but I disagree.
Okay.
I think that cloud, don't laugh, infrastructure as a service, that whole thing is going to turn into much like the utility companies. I didn't realize utility companies used to be in everybody's neighborhood.
I agree.
So you had your utility that applied your electricity. Then people kind of went, well, wait a minute. We're going to have a big utility company because it's the same stuff, and we can get it at cost.
I agree.
They're going to move to that. And then people who were building all of those went, kind of wish we could build a lot more of them.
How long did we take to build Con Ed?
I can't say, I'm not that old.
Okay, so my point is I think you're spot on. There's no question. I agree with you completely. The idea is, scale and the economies of scale will dictate consolidation. That in the early 1900s, most businesses had an electric department.
Yeah.
And that electric department was responsible for making sure that the kind of electricity and the electricity vendor and the kinds of bulbs, and God give me strength. They had bulb specialists, okay? Who changes the light bulbs now? The janitor. So it kind of gives you an idea of how it evolved. You don't need a tremendous amount of skill anymore to change a light bulb. And there will come a point where notion of swapping out a server won't require the same amount of skill and won't be on the premises, and I get that. I don't have a problem with it. I'm just making the case that the evolution is likely, the curve, the arc, is likely to be a little slower.
So we have hopeful velocity. Ours is far more hopeful on the velocity of this.
Yes, yeah. But now the other side, the flip side to that coin, if I'm right, and that arc is gradual, the flip side to that coin is those who feel a sense of urgency and decide to move quickly to exploit new opportunity and adopt a risk as a result, or as part of the process. They have some wonderful, wonderful options.
They do.
They do. And there are some incredible things. I can ride that cost curve down, unlike my competitors. Suddenly I can offload cost and it is far more predictable. There are, for early adopters, there's some amazing opportunities. Amazing. But for those laggards, it's not like they're not going to die an ugly death, unless it's Sears, perhaps. But anyway, go ahead.
I really like, so we're getting on a tangent here, but as far as I think the big win on all this is infrastructure as code.
Yes.
And the reason being, do you remember you used to have to go and beg finance for a test environment?
Yes.
And the pre-prod environment, they'd be like, oh, first, no. And then second, I'll give you 10%.
Yes.
But I don't care. So now, not only can you do those kind of things, test at scale, it's at an incredibly low cost compared to before. And it's amazingly flexible. And you can do so many things at lower cost and the flexibility. I think that's going to be a real game changer.
For those who adopt early, there are some incredible opportunities out there. No two ways about it. No two ways about it. I agree with you completely.
So that's it for our first podcast. And it's a 3-part series, too. I'm holding you to that. But give us a preview of what's next.
So the series is all about the idea that we too often try to put metrics in place before we understand either why or, even better, how. So the why we've covered. Why did we end up organizing the way we have? Why do we have an infrastructure group? Why do we have a software group? Okay, so we know now that we were kind of co-opted by any number of market forces. Okay, so then the next step is to understand, okay, so how do we get out of that? What are the things that we must do to overturn that paradigm, for lack of a better word? What are the steps, practically speaking, that we can take to adopt this approach as well as its attendant methodology? And then at the very last, the final one, we start to measure. How well are we doing? Too often organizations institute processes and never stop and ask themselves, how good am I at the process? So we're going to talk about that in the next one.
Excellent. Thank you, Al, for coming down.
The pleasure's mine.
Always a pleasure. I'm really looking forward to this podcast. I'm very excited about this. I think this is really great.
So am I.
And it's going to happen real soon.
Okay. Looking forward to the next one.
The Agile Advocate is a production of Government CIO Media and Research. For more podcasts, head to governmentcio.com/podcasts. The Agile Advocate is produced by Amy Kluber. It is hosted by Bill Drew. Edited by Resonate Recordings. Theme music provided by Big Hoax. If you're interested in sponsoring a podcast, contact Joe O'Neill at JONEILL@governmentcio.com.